Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku fought beside Green Arrow as his sharpest apprentice. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air in Kamino Ward tasted of ozone and pulverized concrete. It was a flavor Izuku Midoriya had become far too familiar with. Above him, the sky was a bruised twilight, choked with smoke from a burning office building that bled embers onto the street below. He was a green comet in the gloom, propelled by the crackling energy of One for All, full cowl, with tendrils of pure black energy. Black whip, lashing out from his arms. Todoroki, left flank. Bakugo, provide suppressing fire. I'm getting the last of the civilians out. Izuku's voice was strained, a raw command cutting through the din of battle. His feet barely touched the shattered asphalt before he launched himself upward again, using a burst of air from his gloves to augment float. Below, a mosaic of chaos unfolded. Shoto Todoroki's glaciers erupted from the ground, creating barriers and trapping the villain's minions. Kakin was a screaming meteor of orange and white, his explosions a percussive beat against the villain's relentless assault. Their target called himself Nexus. His quirk, a horrifyingly unstable power named Fractal Gate, allowed him to tear holes in the fabric of reality. These weren't the clean, stable portals of Kurogiri. They were jagged wounds in space-time, shimmering with impossible colors and disgorging blasts of kinetic force, heat, or nauseating vertigo. Stay still, you little heroes! Nexus shrieked, his voice thin and reedy. He was a pathetic figure, a man in a cheap suit with eyes that spun like pinwheels, but his quirk was A-class, a city-level threat. A shimmering tear, the color of an oil slick on water, opened in front of Izuku. He felt a wave of crushing gravity emanate from it, pulling him down. He gritted his teeth, pouring more of One for All's power into his limbs. Not happening! He anchored himself with 3 black whip tendrils plunged deep into the facade of a nearby building. The stone groaned under the strain. With his free hand, he shot another tendril towards the last remaining civilian, a terrified woman clinging to a bent fire escape on the 4th floor of the burning building. Hold on! He yelled. The black energy wrapped securely around her waist. DKU, you damn nerd, he's prepping another one! Bakugo's roar was his only warning. Izuku's eyes snapped back to Nexus. The villain was cackling, both hands raised as a vortex of swirling purple and green light coalesced between them. It was larger than any he had summoned before, a swirling nebula of raw chaos. If I'm going down, Nexus screamed, his sanity clearly frayed. I'm taking this whole goddamn block with me. The fire escape gave a sickening lurch. The woman screamed. Izuku's focus split, 1,000 calculations running through his mind in a nanosecond. The support bolts are failing. I have to pull her out now, but Nexus's attack is imminent. Todoroki's ice wall is too far. Bakugo's AP shot might destabilize the portal further. I have to do both. He yanked. The woman flew from the collapsing metal, arcing through the air towards him. At the same moment, he released his anchors and kicked off the wall. A Delaware smash condensed into his saws to propel himself out of the path of the oncoming reality tear. He caught the woman, cradling her against his chest as they landed in a controlled roll behind a slab of fallen concrete. Are you okay? He asked, his voice gentle despite the adrenaline hammering in his ears. She nodded, speechless with terror. He gave her a reassuring, albeit strained, smile. Get to the evacuation zone. We'll handle this. As she scrambled away, Uraraka floated down beside him, her face grim. Deku, he's getting more reckless. His portals are becoming unstable. I know, Izuku said, rising to his feet. He could feel One for All thrumming under his skin, a chorus of voices in the back of his mind, a silent council of past users lending him their strength. The force danger sense was a low thrum of anxiety, a constant warning. The 6th smokescreen was ready to deploy. He was a living arsenal, a legacy of heroism embodied. They regrouped. Bakugo landed with a crunch, his gauntlets smoking. His powers fluctuating. He's losing control. One more big push should do it. I agree, Todoroki added, a thin layer of frost covering his right side to cool him down. But his next attack could be his last and most powerful. Izuku looked at the villain, who was now panting, sweat plastering his hair to his forehead. He saw the desperation in his eyes. He was a cornered animal, and that made him infinitely more dangerous. "We go in together," Izuku declared, taking the lead. "Todoroki, try to encase his legs, slow him down. Uraraka, on my signal, make the debris around him weightless. Kaken, when he's immobilized, hit him with everything you've got. I'll go for the direct takedown." It was a solid plan. It was a Yue plan. It should have worked. They moved as one, a symphony of coordinated power. Todoroki's eyes surged forward. Nexus, expecting the attack, tore a heat portal open in front of him, melting the glacier into a cloud of steam. But it was a feint. Uraraka, hidden by the steam, touched 3 massive chunks of rubble. They lifted silently into the air. "Now!" Izuku yelled. The rubble crashed down. Nexus, caught off guard, had no time to react. He screamed as he was pinned, his legs trapped. "My turn!" Bakugo bellowed, aiming his gauntlet. Howitzer! Impact! A blinding explosion engulfed the villain. The ground shook. For a moment, Izuku thought it was over. But as the smoke cleared, a chilling sight met their eyes. Nexus was on his knees, his suit shredded, but he was grinning. A manic, broken grin. And all around him, reality was bleeding. The portal he had created to block the final attack hadn't just manifested, it had shattered. Tiny, unstable fractures in space hung in the air like broken glass, each one a pinprick of pure chaos. You pushed me too far," Nexus wheezed, blood trickling from his lips. You broke me." He raised a trembling hand, and the fractures all converged on his palm, coalescing into a sphere of utter non-reality. It wasn't light or dark, but a vortex that seemed to devour color itself. The building behind him began to warp, its straight lines curving as if seen through a fisheye lens. Danger sense screamed in Izuku's skull, a piercing shriek that dwarfed all other thought. This wasn't an attack. It was a complete unraveling. The sphere shot outwards, not at any one of them, but at the weakened, burning office building. The support structures, already compromised, began to dissolve into shimmering static. The entire skyscraper was going to collapse right on top of them, right on top of the street where Bakugo and Uraraka were standing. There was no time for a plan. No time for strategy. There was only instinct. "Get back!" Izuku erupted in a storm of green lightning. He moved faster than he ever had before, pushing full cowl to a reckless 45%. Black Whip shot out, not as a weapon, but as a net, catching both Bakugo and Uraraka and violently yanking them backwards, out of the immediate crush zone. "DKU, what the hell are you?" Bakugo's protest was cut off as he was flung through the air. Izuku didn't hear him. He was facing the wave of chaotic energy head-on. He put himself between his friends and the end of the world, planting his feet and bracing for an impact he knew he couldn't withstand. His last sight was of Uraraka's wide, terrified eyes and Bakugo's face, a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. He saw his friends, his rivals, his family, then the world ended. It wasn't a blast. It was a dissection. The energy wave hit him and didn't explode, it consumed. He felt a screeching, tearing sensation, as if his very atoms were being pulled apart. The vibrant, living power of One for All, the sacred fire that had burned in his soul for 2 years, was the first thing to be ripped away. It felt like his heart was being vacuumed out of his chest, the chorus of the vestiges screaming in unison before being snuffed out into absolute silence. His consciousness fractured. He saw flashes of 1,000 other places, 1,000,000,000 other lives, a world of towering crystal spires, a world of endless ocean, a world where the sky was a tapestry of green and purple nebulae. He saw faces he didn't know, heard languages he couldn't understand. He was a single drop of water thrown into an infinite ocean of possibilities. Then, there was only a crushing, agonizing pressure, a final, silent scream that no one could hear, and the merciful abyss of darkness. Pain was the first architect of his new reality. A dull, throbbing ache that started in his skull and radiated through every limb. The second was the smell. It was a putrid cocktail of stale rainwater, rotting garbage, and something acridly metallic, like old blood. Izuku's eyes fluttered open. His vision was blurry, a smear of muted grays and browns. He was lying on his side, his cheek pressed against cold, gritty concrete. A slow, miserable drizzle was falling from a sky the color of a dead television screen. He pushed himself up with a groan, his body screaming in protest. His hero costume was in tatters. The armored plates were cracked, the green fabric ripped and stained with grime, and what he prayed was his own blood. One of his signature red boots was missing a sole. He took a moment to breathe, the foul air scraping his lungs. Where was he? This wasn't Kamino. The buildings around him were different. They were made of dark brick and rusting iron, covered in a language he couldn't read. It was English, he vaguely recognized from his classes, but the graffiti was layered so thick it was nearly indecipherable. He was in an alley, a narrow chasm between two derelict-looking tenements. Eureka! He croaked, his voice a dry rasp. Kakin! The only answer was the drip of water from a leaky pipe and the distant, mournful wail of a siren. It sounded different from the ones in Japan. Higher-pitched, more desperate. Panic began to set in, a cold, creeping vine wrapping around his heart. He needed to find his friends. He needed to assess the situation. He needed one for all. He closed his eyes, focusing inward, searching for that familiar, warm sea of power. He reached for the wellspring of strength that had defined him, for the connection to All Might and the 7 heroes before him. He found nothing. There was no warmth. No sea. There was only a hollow, cavernous void. An echoing silence where a symphony used to be. The connection wasn't just gone, it felt like it had been surgically excised from his soul, leaving behind a raw, phantom ache. No! He whispered, his voice trembling. He tried again, clenching his fists, focusing with all his might. He tried to summon the green lightning of Full Cowl, the dark energy of Black Whip, anything. Nothing happened. His body remained stubbornly, terrifyingly normal. The realization crashed down on him with the weight of a collapsing skyscraper. It was gone. One for all was gone. He was quirkless. Again. A sob escaped his lips, a raw, wounded sound that was swallowed by the oppressive gloom of the alley. Tears streamed down his face, mixing with the rain and the filth on his cheeks. He was alone, injured, and powerless, in a place he didn't recognize. The hope that All Might had bestowed upon him, the dream he had chased with every fiber of his being, had been ripped away. He was just Deku again. The useless, worthless Deku he had been his entire life before a single strand of blonde hair had changed everything. He stayed there for what could have been minutes or hours, a broken statue of despair in the rain. Hunger gnawed at his stomach, a dull ache that joined the symphony of his other pains. Thirst clawed at his throat. He knew he couldn't stay here. He had to move, had to find someone, anyone. Staggering to his feet, he used the grimy wall for support. Every step was an agony. He limped out of the alley and onto a desolate street. The city was a beast of brick and steel, grim and unwelcoming. The few people he saw scurried by with their heads down, their faces drawn and pale. No one spared him a second glance, his tattered hero costume looking like just another variation of homelessness. He walked for what felt like miles, his initial panic giving way to a numb, bone-deep exhaustion. He didn't know where he was going. He was just moving, a ghost haunting a city that wasn't his own. The drizzle intensified into a steady downpour, plastering his green hair to his forehead. He was shivering, cold and miserable, when a sound cut through his stupor, a scream. It was sharp and terrified, coming from another alley just ahead. Izuku's head snapped up. His heart, which had felt like a dead weight in his chest, gave a painful lurch. Every logical part of his brain told him to keep walking. He was injured. He was weak. He was nothing. He had no power to help. Getting involved would be suicide, but 15 years of ingrained, obsessive heroism didn't just vanish with a quirk. The instinct was deeper than that. It was in his bones, in the very marrow of his being. Someone was in trouble. He didn't make a conscious decision. His legs were already moving, carrying him towards the sound. He peered around the corner of the alley. 2 men, burly and clad in dirty jackets, had a woman pinned against the wall. One of them held a grimy kitchen knife to her throat, while the other fumbled with the strap of her purse. "Just give it to us, lady, and we won't have to mess up that pretty face," The one with the knife growled. The woman was sobbing, her eyes wide with terror. Izuku's blood ran cold, then hot. Rage, pure and undiluted, burned away some of his despair. But the rage was followed by a wave of cold, stark fear. What could he do? A St. Louis smash would have ended this in a heartbeat. A single strand of black whip could have disarmed them both. But he didn't have those things. He had his fists, which felt like fragile glass, and his body, which was a canvas of pain. He was about to back away, to go find help, when the man with the knife pressed the blade harder against the woman's skin, drawing a thin line of red. No. The thought was a thunderclap in his mind. I will not run away. His brain, the one part of him that had never failed, kicked into overdrive. The frantic muttering started under his breath, a habit he thought he'd mostly broken. 2 assailants, one armed with a blade, primary threat, second one focused on the bag, victim is cornered, no direct escape route. Environment is key. His eyes darted around the alley, absorbing every detail. A dented, overflowing dumpster. A loose metal lid on a smaller garbage can. A fire escape on the building to his left, its metal rungs slick with rain, but one of the lower support bolts was rusted through, a point of structural weakness. A discarded length of lead pipe, about 2 feet long, lying in a puddle near the dumpster. A plan, desperate and ridiculously risky, formed in his mind. It wasn't a hero's plan. It was a survivor's plan. He picked up the garbage can lid. It was flimsy aluminum, but it would make a noise. Taking a deep breath, he hurled it like a discus. It sailed across the alley and clattered loudly against the far wall, behind the 2 thugs. What was that? The second man grunted, turning around. The man with the knife glanced over his shoulder, his attention diverted for a single, crucial second. That was all Izuku needed. He burst from his hiding spot, not a flash of lightning, but a desperate, limping sprint. He scooped up the lead pipe as he ran. He wasn't aiming for the men. He was aiming for the fire escape. With a pained yell, he swung the heavy pipe with all his might against the rusted support bolt. The corroded metal shrieked and snapped. The entire lower section of the fire escape, freed from its anchor, crashed down with a deafening clang of metal on concrete, landing right between the thugs and their victim. It was chaos. The second thug stumbled back in surprise, tripping over the fallen ladder. The knife wielder, startled by the sudden pandemonium, loosened his grip on the woman. Go! Run! Izuku screamed at her. The woman didn't hesitate. She shoved past her stunned assailant, and fled down the alley, disappearing into the relative safety of the street. For a moment, Izuku felt a surge of triumph. It worked. He'd done it. He'd saved someone. Then, 2 pairs of furious eyes landed on him. You little bastard! The man with the knife snarled, his face contorting with rage. You're gonna pay for that. They advanced on him, spreading out to cut off his escape. Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs. The pipe felt impossibly heavy in his trembling hands. His desperate plan had worked to save the victim, but he hadn't thought about the second part, saving himself. He was trapped. He was going to be beaten, stabbed, and left for dead in this filthy alley in a world that wasn't his. He thought of his mother. He thought of All Might. He was sorry. He'd failed them. He raised the pipe, his knuckles white, preparing to go down fighting. Thwack! It was a sound like a giant snapping his fingers. The man with the knife cried out and dropped his weapon, a sleek, green-fletched arrow suddenly protruding from the back of his hand, pinning it to the brick wall behind him. He stared at it in stunned disbelief. Before the second man could even process what had happened, a dark shape descended from above. It moved with a silent, predatory grace that was utterly inhuman. A figure clad in dark green leather, a hood pulled low over his face, casting it in deep shadow. He landed in a crouch, drawing a second arrow from the quiver on his back in a single fluid motion. He didn't fire it. He used the bow itself as a weapon, a solid-looking recurve that he wielded like a parrying stave. He slammed the riser into the second thug's jaw with a sickening crunch. The man crumpled to the ground, unconscious. The first thug, screaming in pain and terror, tried to pull his hand free from the wall. The hooded figure was on him in an instant. He grabbed the man's shoulder, twisted, and a sharp crack echoed in the alley as the man's arm was dislocated. He slumped against the wall, whimpering, his fight completely gone. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 5 seconds. It was brutal. It was efficient. It was terrifying. The hooded figure stood in the center of the alley, a silent, imposing specter in the rain. He calmly retrieved his arrow from the wall in the man's hand, wiping the blood on the unconscious thug's jacket before returning it to his quiver. He gave the 2 downed criminals a disdainful glance, then his head turned, and the shadows of the hood shifted. Izuku felt, more than saw, a pair of intense eyes lock onto him. Izuku stood frozen, the lead pipe still clutched in his hand. He was staring at a pro hero, he assumed. But this was unlike any hero he had ever seen. There was no flashy costume, no grandstanding, no reassuring smile for the cameras. There was only a cold, lethal competence. This man was a hunter. The figure took a step towards him. Izuku flinched, instinctively tightening his grip on the pipe. The man stopped. He seemed to be studying him, his gaze sweeping over Izuku's tattered costume, the pipe, and the collapsed fire escape. Izuku could feel the man's analytical stare piecing together what had happened. He saw the discarded garbage can lid. He saw the broken bolt on the wall. He saw the calculated, desperate chaos Izuku had created. A low, gravelly voice emerged from the shadows of the hood. "You did all this?" Izuku couldn't find his voice. He just nodded, his body trembling with a mixture of fear and leftover adrenaline. The man was silent for a long moment. Izuku could see a faint glimmer of green light in his own reflection in the man's goggles, or perhaps a mask. Then, he heard a soft sound, a barely audible whisper. It was himself. He was muttering again. Calculated trajectory of the arrow, approximately 25 degrees downward angle, suggesting a rooftop perch. Use the bow as a melee weapon, reinforcing the limbs for blunt force trauma, non-lethal takedowns but with maximum efficiency, targeting joints and pressure points. A vigilante? No, the equipment is too high grade. The hooded figure took another step closer, and this time there was something different in his posture. Curiosity. Maybe even surprise. He had clearly heard Izuku's whispered analysis. "You have a sharp eye, kid," the man said, his voice less threatening now. He reached up and pulled back his hood. The face underneath was weathered, framed by short-cut blonde hair and a neatly trimmed goatee. His eyes were a piercing blue, etched with the lines of someone who had seen too much. He looked tired, but his gaze was sharp, intelligent. He looked at Izuku not as a victim to be rescued, but as a puzzle to be solved. "That was a crazy, stupid plan," the man said, his lips twitching in what might have been the start of a smile. "But it worked. You saved her. You got guts." Izuku finally lowered the pipe, letting it clatter to the wet ground. The last of his strength seemed to drain away with it. He swayed on his feet, the world tilting precariously. The man moved quickly, catching him by the shoulder before he could fall. His grip was like iron. "Easy there," he said, steadying him. "You're in rough shape." Izuku looked up at the stranger, this grim, efficient hero who had appeared from the shadows. He was lost, alone, and completely broken. He had nothing. He was nothing. But for a fleeting moment in this alley, he had been a hero again, even without his power. This man had seen it. The man looked down at him, his intense gaze softening with something that might have been empathy, or perhaps recognition. He saw the shredded, outlandish costume. He saw the fire of a hero still burning in the eyes of a terrified, injured boy. "My name is Oliver Queen," he said. He extended his free hand, a simple, open gesture. "Looks like you could use some help." For the first time since waking up in this cold, gray world, Izuku Midoriya saw not a threat, not an obstacle, but a lifeline. A hand reaching out from the darkness. Hesitantly, with a hand that still trembled, he took it. The world swam back into focus to the smell of antiseptic. It was a sharp, sterile scent that cut through the alley's lingering stench of decay and reminded Izuku, with a painful lurch of his heart, of Recovery Girl's office. For a dizzying second, he thought maybe it had all been a nightmare. Nexus, the portal, the horrifying silence where One for All used to be. He imagined opening his eyes to see the familiar white ceiling of UA's infirmary, with All Might's skeletal form in a chair beside him, offering a clumsy word of reassurance. But the hand on his shoulder was not frail and bony, it was a band of steel. And the surface he was lying on was not a soft cot, but a hard leather couch. Izuku's eyes snapped open. He was in a large, sparsely furnished room that looked like a converted loft or industrial workshop. The walls were exposed brick, dark and weathered. High above, steel beams crisscrossed the ceiling lost in shadow, and the only light came from a few bare bulb lamps that cast long, distorted shadows. There was a minimalist kitchen area in one corner, a simple table with 2 chairs, and the couch he was on. It was a place built for function, not comfort, a fortress, not a home. Oliver Queen was sitting on a metal stool beside him, dabbing a cotton swab soaked in disinfectant on a nasty gash on Izuku's forehead. The man's movements were precise and economical, betraying a long and painful familiarity with treating injuries. "Stay still," Oliver said, his voice a low grumble. It wasn't unkind, but it held the unyielding weight of a command. "You've got a mild concussion, 3 cracked ribs, and you're severely dehydrated. Whoever you were fighting with before you decided to play hero in my city did a real number on you." Izuku flinched, both from the sting of the antiseptic and the casual mention of his previous life. He tried to sit up, a surge of adrenaline and fear overriding the pain. Where am I? Who are you?" Oliver placed a firm hand on his chest, gently pushing him back down. "Easy. You're in a safe house. And I already told you, the name's Oliver Queen. As for who I am, let's just say I'm the guy who keeps people from getting killed in dark alleys." Sometimes, Izuku's eyes darted around the room, cataloging every detail. 1 door, reinforced steel. No windows he could see. The layout was an open-plan defensive position. His mind, starved for data, latched onto the man himself. Oliver Queen. He was dressed now in simple civilian clothes, a gray Henley and dark jeans. But he couldn't hide the coiled tension in his posture. He moved like a predator at rest, every muscle ready to spring into action. There were faint, silvery scars peeking out from the collar of his shirt and on his forearms. This was a man forged in violence. "Why did you help me?" Izuku asked, his voice barely a whisper. The distrust was a bitter taste in his mouth. Heroes in his world were public figures. They smiled. They reassured. This man was a shadow, and shadows were dangerous. Oliver finished cleaning the cut and applied a butterfly bandage with practiced ease. "Because I was there, and because you, a half-dead kid in a ridiculous costume, did something incredibly stupid and incredibly brave. Most people would have run. You ran in. I tend to notice things like that." He stood up and walked over to the small kitchen. "You're starving. When was the last time you ate?" Izuku had to think. The fight with Nexus felt like a lifetime ago. I don't remember," Oliver returned with a steaming bowl of what looked like simple chicken broth and a glass of water. He set them on the small table next to the couch. "Eat. Drink. Then we'll talk." The smell of the broth made Izuku's stomach ache with a desperate, hollow hunger. He pushed himself into a sitting position, his ribs screaming in protest. He took the bowl with trembling hands, the warmth seeping into his cold fingers. The first spoonful was heaven. He devoured it ravenously, the simple food a balm to his battered body. He drained the glass of water, and then another Oliver brought him. Only when the bowl was empty and the immediate, gnawing hunger had subsided did he look back at the man, who was watching him with an unreadable expression. "So," Oliver said, leaning against the kitchen counter, his arms crossed. "Let's try this again. Who are you, and what happened to you? And try not to lie." "I'm very good at telling when people are lying." Izuku's mind raced. He couldn't tell him the truth. "I'm from another dimension where 80% of the population has superpowers called quirks. I was the 9th inheritor of a sacred power called One for All, given to me by my world's greatest hero, All Might. A villain with a reality-warping quirk threw me here and stripped me of that power." He would be locked in a padded room before he finished the first sentence. He needed a version of the truth. A curated truth. "My name is Izuku Midoriya," he began, his voice steadier now. "Where I come from, there are people with special abilities. We call them powers. I was training to be a hero, to help people." He gestured to his tattered costume. We were in a fight with a villain. A dangerous one. His power was strange. He could create energy fields that warp things around him. There was a big blast of energy. I pushed my friends out of the way. He looked down at his hands, which felt so empty and useless. When I woke up, I was in that alley. And my own power, it's gone. It was all true, from a certain point of view. And it was steeped in enough genuine pain that he hoped it would be believable. Oliver listened intently, his piercing blue eyes never leaving Izuku's face. He didn't scoff. He didn't laugh. He just nodded slowly, as if processing a complex tactical report. Special abilities, he repeated, his tone flat. I've seen some strange things in my time. Things that defy explanation. So, a world full of people with powers doesn't sound as crazy to me as it might to others. He pushed off the counter. What it sounds like is that you're alone, a long way from home, with no way back. The bluntness of the statement hit Izuku like a physical blow. A wave of despair washed over him, so potent it almost made him gag. He squeezed his eyes shut. Yes, get some rest, Oliver said, his voice softening almost imperceptibly. You're safe here for now. We'll figure out what comes next when you can stand without falling over. Oliver showed him to a small, Spartan bedroom off the main area and gave him a set of plain gray sweats to wear. The moment the door closed, Izuku's composure shattered. He sank onto the edge of the simple bed, buried his face in his hands, and let out a choked, silent sob. He was a castaway on an alien shore, his ship sunk, his map gone, the very stars in the sky different and wrong. The quiet emptiness inside him was a constant, screaming reminder of his loss. He wasn't Deku, the hero in training. He was just Izuku Midoriya, the quirkless boy, all over again. The next 3 days passed in a blur of pain, sleep, and broth. Oliver Queen was a phantom presence. He would leave food and fresh water, check Izuku's injuries with his detached, clinical efficiency, and then disappear for hours on end, sometimes returning in the dead of night with new bruises and a grim set to his jaw. Izuku knew, with a certainty that chilled him, that Oliver was the hooded archer. He was going out every night to fight, to wage his own private war on the city. Izuku's body healed with the resilience of a teenager conditioned by years of brutal training. The bruises faded, the ache in his ribs subsided to a dull throb, but his mind was a cage of frantic, circling thoughts. The despair was a heavy cloak, but underneath it, his analytical brain was screaming for stimulus. It was the one part of him that hadn't been taken. He needed a problem to solve, a system to deconstruct, anything to distract him from the gaping void in his soul. On the 4th day, he was pacing the main room like a caged animal when he saw it. On the metal table, placed almost carelessly next to a bowl of fruit, was a blank, black-covered notebook and a simple ballpoint pen. It was bait. A part of him knew it. Oliver was too deliberate a man for such a casual placement. But another, deeper part of him didn't care. It was a lifeline. It was an anchor in the storm of his thoughts. He picked up the pen. The weight of it in his hand was so familiar, so right. He sat down and opened the notebook to the first clean, white page. For a moment, he stared at it, his mind blank. What was there to analyze? Then, he thought of the alley. He thought of the green-fledged arrow. He thought of the silent, brutal takedown. The dam broke. The pen began to move, first slowly, then with increasing speed. The quiet muttering started, a low hum of sound in the silent room. Subject, the hooded archer Oliver Queen? Primary weapon recurve bow. Estimated draw weight 70 to 80 pounds based on arrow velocity and penetration of brick mortar. Materials analysis. Likely a carbon fiber composite riser for low weight and high tensile strength. Limbs reinforced along the edges, suggesting frequent use as a melee blocking/striking weapon. Smart design. Multi-purpose equipment minimizes gear load. He filled the page with a detailed sketch of the bow, adding notes on potential stress points and suggesting a variable cam system to allow for adjustable draw weight on the fly. Useful for short-range non-lethal shots versus long-range armor-piercing ones. He turned the page. Ammunition, standard broadhead arrows. Fletching appears to be a polymer composite, not feathers, for weather resistance. Observation, arrow that pinned assailant's hand was not a standard broadhead, tipped with a high-tensile steel needlepoint designed for piercing without causing excessive tissue damage. A specific non-lethal design. This implies a wide variety of specialized arrowheads. A trick arrow system. He began to sketch, his imagination firing on all cylinders. What other kinds of arrows would be useful? An explosive arrow was too dangerous for an urban environment. But what about a concussive blast? A miniaturized flashbang? A delivery system for tear gas? An EMP arrowhead to disable electronics? He drew a schematic for a BOLO arrow, two weighted projectiles connected by a high-strength wire, designed to wrap around a target's legs. His mind was on fire. This was what he was good at. This was the original Deku, the obsessive fanboy who filled notebooks with hero analysis. Only now, it wasn't hero worship. It was a desperate, clinical deconstruction of survival. He spent hours hunched over the table, the world outside the notebook ceasing to exist. He analyzed the fighting style he'd witnessed. It wasn't one single discipline. It was a brutal, efficient hybrid. The way Oliver had dislocated the thug's arm suggested Krav Maga or Systema, military systems designed for maximum damage in minimum time. But his footwork, the way he descended from above, was more like a parkour artist or an acrobat. The muttering grew louder, the scratching of his pen a frantic rhythm. Stealth capabilities are paramount. His suit, dark colors, non-reflective material. Boots must have soft, sound-dampening soles. Grappling hook arrow observed. Standard winch-based recoil seen on similar support equipment. Recoil and retraction speed could be a liability in high-pressure situations. Current system likely electric motor-based. Too slow. Too loud. He paused, chewing on the end of his pen. How could it be improved? An electric winch was reliable but had its limits. What if you changed the entire propulsion system? Proposed upgrade. GSP grappling arrow system. Grapple and accelerated sequential propulsion. Instead of a motor, use a miniaturized compressed CO2 canister within the arrow shaft. Initial launch of the hook is standard. On attachment, a pressure sensor in the arrowhead triggers the canister, venting the gas through angled ports in the shaft. This provides a powerful, near-instantaneous retraction, pulling the user up far faster than a motor. A secondary, smaller charge could be used to rapidly rewind the cable into the housing. Potential issues: limited number of uses per canister, noise level of gas release. But the speed advantage would be a game changer. He sketched it out feverishly. The arrow shaft with its housing for the CO2 cartridge, the magnetic clamp head for faster adhesion to metal surfaces, the quick-release mechanism built into the bow's riser. He filled the page with annotations, equations for thrust and velocity, notes on materials. He didn't notice the passage of time. He didn't hear the soft click of the steel door opening. He was so lost in his work that the first sign he had that he was no longer alone was when a shadow fell over his notebook. He looked up with a start. Oliver Queen was standing over him, a grocery bag in one hand. He was in his civilian clothes, but his expression was one Izuka hadn't seen before. It was a look of utter, profound astonishment. Izuka's blood ran cold. He'd been caught. He scrambled to close the notebook, his face flushing with embarrassment and fear. "I am sorry! I just found it, and I was bored, and it's a stupid habit. I just start writing. I can stop." "Don't," Oliver said, his voice quiet but firm. He set the grocery bag down and reached for the notebook. Izuka flinched but didn't resist as Oliver gently took it from his hands. Oliver flipped through the pages, his face a mask of concentration. He saw the detailed breakdown of his bow. He saw the tactical analysis of his fighting style. He saw the schematics for the BOLO arrow and the flashbang arrow. Then he stopped, his eyes fixed on the final page, the detailed, brilliantly rendered schematics for the GSP grappling arrow. He was silent for a full minute, his gaze tracing the lines and reading the frantic, scribbled notes. Izuka held his breath, his heart hammering in his chest. He expected anger or suspicion. He expected to be thrown out onto the street. Instead, Oliver slowly closed the notebook and placed it carefully back on the table. He looked at Izuku, and for the first time, the guarded, weary mask was gone. In its place was a look of raw, unadulterated awe. "I have a partner," Oliver said, his voice a low murmur. "She's a certified genius, a graduate from MIT. We've been working on a faster grappling system for 6 months. Our best design was a magnetic accelerator winch that was too heavy and drained too much power." He tapped the cover of the notebook. "You solved the problem we've been stuck on for half a year. In an afternoon, with a pen." He looked Izuku straight in the eye. "What did you learn to do this?" I don't know," Izuku stammered, overwhelmed. "I've just always done it. I watch heroes and I break them down. Their powers, their gear, their fighting styles. I look for weaknesses and strengths and ways to improve them. It's just what I do." "This isn't just a hobby, kid," Oliver said, his voice laced with an intensity that made the hair on Izuku's arms stand up. "This is a gift. A weapon." Oliver was silent for another long moment, 1,000 calculations seeming to run behind his eyes. He was making a decision, a monumental one. The air in the room grew thick with unspoken possibilities. Finally, he spoke. "You've been honest with me, as much as you can be. It's time I returned the favor." He nodded towards the far wall, a solid expanse of dark brick. "Come with me." Izuku, confused and wary, followed him. Oliver walked to the wall and pressed his palm against a specific brick. There was a low hiss of hydraulics, and a section of the wall slid away, revealing not the street outside, but the gleaming steel doors of an industrial elevator. "After you," Oliver said. Izuku's heart was pounding. This was it. This was where he found out if Oliver Queen was a hero or something far more dangerous. He stepped into the elevator, and Oliver followed, the doors sliding shut behind them and sealing them in a small, quiet space. Oliver pressed a single, unmarked button. The elevator descended. It moved silently and quickly, a smooth, deep plunge into the bedrock of the city. Izuku's ears popped. The descent lasted for perhaps 30 seconds, and when the doors slid open again, Izuku's breath hitched in his throat. He was standing on a raised platform overlooking a vast, subterranean cavern. It was a breathtaking fusion of raw stone and cutting-edge technology. On one side, a massive bank of computers hummed quietly, their screens displaying streams of data, satellite maps of the city, and police scanner feeds. In the center was a huge, open training area with gymnastic equipment, archery targets, and sparring mats. Along the far wall, behind panes of reinforced glass, stood a series of alcoves. In one, the green, hooded suit of the archer stood on a mannequin, looking like a silent, waiting sentinel. In others were different versions of the suit, some showing battle damage, and everywhere there were weapons. Cases of arrows, racks of bows, swords, knives, and equipment Izuku couldn't even identify. This wasn't a safe house. This was a lair. A command center. The heart of a war. "Welcome," Oliver said quietly from behind him. "To the Arrow Cave." Izuku stepped out of the elevator, his eyes wide with a familiar, almost forgotten sense of wonder. It was like the first time he'd seen the schematics for All Might's agency, or the first time he'd walked through the gates of UA. He was standing in the inner sanctum of a true hero. A different kind of hero. A darker, more grounded hero, but a hero nonetheless. You're him," Izuku whispered, turning to face Oliver. "The archer. They must call you Green Arrow." The name felt right on his tongue. A rare, faint smile touched Oliver's lips. "Something like that." He began to walk down the metal steps to the main floor, and Izuku followed, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. "In your world," Oliver began, his voice resonating in the quiet cave, "power is given. It's a genetic lottery. You're born with it. People look at heroes like they're gods, untouchable beings blessed with gifts no normal person can understand." He stopped in front of a heavy training dummy, its torso peppered with holes from arrows and strikes. He ran a hand over its battered surface. "This world has people with powers too. Metahumans. But they're rare. For the most part, this city isn't threatened by gods. It's threatened by men. Greedy men, cruel men, broken men, and to fight them, you don't need to fly or lift a building. You need something else." He turned to face Izuku, his gaze burning with a fierce, unwavering conviction. You need will. You need discipline. You need to be able to take a beating and get back up, again and again. You need precision, and more than anything else, he said, tapping his temple, you need to be smarter, faster, and more ruthless than they are. Here, power isn't given. It's earned. It's forged in pain and sacrifice. He took a step closer to Izuku, his eyes dropping to the notebook that he still held in his hand. When that villain took your power, you thought you'd lost everything. You thought your dream of being a hero was dead. He looked up, his expression deadly serious. You were wrong. He didn't take your greatest weapon. Your mind. Your ability to see things no one else can, to analyze, to strategize, to innovate. That's your superpower now, Izuku, and it's one nobody can ever take away from you. Izuku stared at him, his throat tight with a surge of emotion he couldn't name. For the first time since he'd woken up in this world, someone was looking at him and not seeing a broken, powerless victim. They were seeing potential. They were seeing strength. Oliver Queen laid out his offer, the words hanging in the air like drawn arrows. I can't send you home. I don't have that kind of power. You're stuck here, and you have a choice. You can try to disappear, to forget who you were and live a normal life in a city that eats people like you alive. Or, you can find a new purpose. He gestured to the cave around them, to the computers, the weapons, the suit. I'm one man fighting a war. I need an edge. Your mind is that edge. I can teach you. I can train your body to match your mind. I can teach you how to shoot, how to fight, how to move through this city like a ghost. I can teach you how to survive. But more than that, I can give you a reason to. He looked Izuku square in the eye. The final, crucial offer lay bare. Become my apprentice. Fight by my side. Let me help you forge yourself into a new kind of hero. Not with the power you were given, but with the strength you build for yourself, right here, right now. The silence that followed was absolute. Izuku's world, which had been a chaotic, spinning vortex of despair, suddenly snapped into sharp focus. A path had appeared in the wasteland. It was not the bright, sunlit path he had walked with all might. This was a path through the shadows, fraught with pain and danger. But it was a path forward. He thought of his dream. To save people. To be a symbol who could make them feel safe. That dream hadn't died. It had just lost its way. Oliver Queen was offering him a new map. Tears welled in Izuku's eyes, but for the first time since he'd arrived, they weren't tears of sorrow or despair. They were tears of profound, aching relief. The hollow space in his chest still ached with the ghost of one for all, but now, a tiny, fragile seed of hope was taking root in that barren ground. He looked at Oliver, at the grim, scarred man who had shown him more kindness and respect in 4 days than he'd received from most people his entire life before UA. He saw a mentor. A teacher. A chance. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, took a deep, shuddering breath, and gave his answer. It wasn't loud or triumphant. It was a quiet, resolute whisper that echoed with the weight of 1,000 broken dreams and one new, unbreakable promise. Okay, the first lesson Oliver Queen taught Izuku Midoriya was that pain is a meticulous teacher. It finds every weakness, every shortcut taken, every moment of hesitation, and it brands the lesson onto your muscles and bones so you never forget. The Arrow Cave became Izuku's entire world. There was no day or night, only the constant, low hum of the servers, the crisp, cool air that smelled of ozone and gun oil, and the endless cycle of training, analysis, and exhaustion. The hollow ache in his chest where One for All used to be was still there, a phantom limb of the soul, but it was now drowned out by the symphony of new aches and pains that defined his existence. Again, Oliver's voice was a flat, unforgiving baritone from the floor below. Izuku's hands were raw, his shoulders screaming as he dangled from the top rung of the salmon ladder. His sweat-soaked gray t-shirt clung to his back like a second skin. He had seen Oliver ascend the ladder with the fluid grace of a creature born to it, a rhythmic explosion of power as he kicked his body up and slapped the steel bar onto the next set of rungs. Izuku, despite the formidable physique UA's training had given him, was failing miserably. His UA training was built around a body that could handle superhuman forces. This was different. This was about pure, unadulterated human strength, technique, and will. He took a ragged breath, tried to replicate the explosive hip thrust he'd seen Oliver perform, and flung the bar upwards. It caught the left rung but missed the right, sending a jarring, painful vibration through his entire frame and dropping him unceremoniously onto the thick safety mat below. He landed with a grunt, the impact stealing the wind from his lungs. "Your core is disengaged," Oliver stated, not moving from his spot. He wasn't a comforting teacher. He didn't offer praise for trying. He offered only diagnosis. "You're trying to muscle through it with your arms and back. That strength is finite. The power comes from your center. It's a chain reaction. Hips, core, shoulders, arms. One fluid motion. You analyze everything, Izuku. So analyze that. Break it down. Stop thinking like a powerhouse and start thinking like a machine." Izuku pushed himself to his knees, his body trembling with fatigue. He had been at this for an hour. It was humiliating. He'd once been able to leap over buildings, and now he was being defeated by a glorified ladder. But Oliver's words cut through the frustration. Think like a machine. He closed his eyes, ignoring the burn in his muscles. He replayed Oliver's movements in his mind, not as an act of strength, but as a sequence of mechanical actions. He visualized the angle of the hip snap, the tensing of the abdominal muscles, the precise timing of the pull. He saw the physics of it, the transfer of kinetic energy. He got back on the ladder. He took a breath. He didn't think about lifting himself. He thought about initiating the sequence. Hips. Core. Shoulders. Arms. He exploded upwards. The bar left his hands for a fraction of a second and landed with a solid, satisfying clang on the next set of rungs. He hung there stunned. He'd done it. A small, shaky grin touched his lips. "Good," Oliver said, the single word of praise landing with the weight of a full-throated cheer. "Now do it again. Until you can't lift your arms. Then do it one more time." That was the physical regimen. It was a relentless, brutal assault on the limits of his body. Oliver pushed him through punishing strength and conditioning circuits that left him a quivering heap on the mats. But it wasn't just about brute force. A significant portion of their time was spent on movement. Oliver's world was vertical. The city was a concrete jungle, and he was its apex predator. He taught Izuku parkour. He made him run drills across a constructed obstacle course in the cave, leaping between platforms, vaulting over walls, and balancing on narrow beams. At first, Izuku's movements were clumsy. He was used to having float for fine-tuning his trajectory and black whip to arrest a fall. Now, there was only his body and the unforgiving floor. "You're hesitating," Oliver called out as Izuku stood on the edge of a 10-foot gap between platforms. "You're calculating the odds of failure. Stop. Your body already knows how to do this. You have the strength, you have the agility. What you lack is trust. Trust the jump. Trust your hands. Trust your feet. Commit, or you will fall." It was another lesson. In his old life, hesitation could be corrected mid-air with a burst of power. Here, hesitation was the enemy. It was the parent of failure. He learned to silence the analytical part of his brain, the part that was screaming about risk and consequence, and let a more primal instinct take over. He learned to feel the rhythm of the city, to see paths where others saw walls, to move with a silent, fluid grace that was the polar opposite of his former explosive, ground-shattering style. He was no longer a force of nature. He was becoming a part of the environment, a shadow that flowed through the concrete and steel. If the physical training was about forging his body into a weapon, the archery was about honing his mind into a razor's edge. Oliver set a single, unlit candle on a target 70 yards away, at the far end of the cave's range. "Hit the wick," he said simply. Izuku, holding a simple recurve bow that felt both alien and strangely natural in his hands, nodded. His obsessive nature made him a quick study. He'd devoured every book on archery Oliver had, memorizing the principles of stance, grip, anchor point, and release. His analytical mind broke down the shot into a complex physics problem: arrow weight, draw strength, distance, the almost imperceptible air currents in the cave. He drew the string back to his anchor point, the corner of his mouth. He aimed, accounted for a minuscule drop, and released. The arrow flew true, a whisper of sound, and struck the target. It was less than half an inch from the wick. For a beginner, it was a phenomenal shot. You miss, Oliver stated, his voice devoid of emotion. I was only off by a centimeter. Izuku protested, a hint of frustration in his voice. And a centimeter is the difference between disarming a man and killing him. Oliver countered, his tone hardening. It's the difference between severing a detonator wire and setting off the bomb. In our world, there is no almost. There is only success and failure. The target is the wick. Not the candle. Not the target. The wick. Do it again. Izuku shot again. And again. And again. His fingers grew sore, his shoulder ached. He filled the target with arrows, each one a testament to his incredible precision, each one a frustrating failure. They were all clustered around the wick, a tight, impressive grouping, but not one of them touched it. You're thinking too much, Oliver said, stepping up behind him. He didn't touch Izuku, but his presence was a palpable force. You're trying to solve an equation. Archery isn't math. It's breathing. He placed a hand on Izuku's diaphragm. It starts here. A calm breath in. A steady hold. A controlled release on the exhale. The bow is an extension of your lungs. The arrow is an extension of your will, he continued, his voice dropping to a low, almost hypnotic murmur. Stop aiming with your eyes. They can be deceived. Feel the shot. Feel the line that connects you to the target. In the moment before you release, there is no bow, no arrow, no you. There is only the path. See it. Become it. It sounded like mystical nonsense, the kind of thing a sensei in an old movie would say. But Izuku was desperate. He closed his eyes. He let go of the numbers, the physics, the frantic calculations. He focused only on his breath, the steady rise and fall of his chest. He drew the bowstring back, feeling the tension not in his arms, but across his entire back. He held the breath, and in the stillness, he pictured the wick, a tiny white thread in the darkness of his mind. He imagined a single, unbroken line of green light connecting his heart to that thread. He exhaled, and as he did, his fingers relaxed. The string slipped away. He opened his eyes just in time to see the arrow's green fletching disappear. There was a soft thwack. He looked down the range. His arrow was there, buried in the target. And the wick was gone, neatly severed. A slow smile spread across Oliver's face. It was the first genuine, unguarded smile Izuku had seen from him. Now you're an archer, he said. While his body and instincts were being reforged, his mind was given a new kingdom to rule. Oliver introduced him to the nerve center of the arrow cave, the massive supercomputer linked to a dozen monitors, a glowing, humming god of data, and he introduced him to its high priestess. This is Elena Vasco, Oliver said one evening. She keeps our world turning. Elena, this is Izuku. The woman sitting in the high-backed chair spun around. She was in her late 20s, with sharp, intelligent features, a cascade of dark, unruly hair tied back in a messy bun, and eyes that seemed to be dissecting him on a molecular level. A pair of high-tech glasses were perched on her nose, displaying a faint cyan HUD on the lenses. She was nursing a massive, ridiculously oversized mug of coffee that read sarcasm as my only defense against the stupid. So this is the stray you brought home, Elena said, her voice dry and laced with a thick layer of cynicism. She looked him up and down. He looks a little young to be playing Robin Hood. You sure he's house-trained? He's smarter than both of us combined, Oliver said, simply ignoring the jab. He's going to be helping you. Elena raised a skeptical eyebrow. Oh really? Can he decrypt a triple-scrambled Albanian mob server while tracking ghost signals from a stolen military drone? Because that's my Tuesday. Izuku felt his face flush. I can try. Over the next few weeks, Izuku became Elena's shadow. He watched her work, his mind absorbing the information at a staggering rate. He learned about network security, signal tracing, facial recognition algorithms, and the complex digital architecture of Star City. Elena, initially dismissive, found her cynicism slowly eroding. The boy wasn't just smart, he was a prodigy. He didn't just learn what she taught him, he improved upon it. He wrote new, more efficient search algorithms for their crime database. He designed a predictive modeling program based on criminal psychology and resource analysis that was more accurate than anything the SCPD had. He was a force multiplier, his analytical genius streamlining every aspect of their intelligence gathering. The breakthrough came a month into his training. Elena was tracking a new crew of smugglers who were hitting high-end electronics warehouses with almost supernatural timing, always a step ahead of the police. "I don't get it," she grumbled, staring at a map of the city dotted with red markers indicating the heists. "There's no pattern. The locations are all over the map, different companies, different days of the week. It's random." Izuku leaned over her shoulder, his eyes scanning the data streams. His muttering started, a quiet storm of words. "Not random. Randomness is a pattern in itself. Look at the transport schedules, not the locations. They're hitting warehouses a day after they received shipments from specific manufacturers, Cord Industries, Stag Enterprises. But the manifests are encrypted. How do they know?" He started typing, his fingers flying across a keyboard. He cross-referenced the heist dates with city infrastructure reports. Here, there was a citywide network security update 3 months ago, implemented by a third-party contractor, a shell corporation. If they installed a backdoor then, they wouldn't have access to the manifests directly, but they could monitor network traffic volume. A big shipment means a huge spike in data as inventory is logged. They aren't reading the mail, they're just seeing the size of the envelope. He pointed to a blinking cursor on the map. This warehouse, on the South Docks, received a massive data burst shipment of microprocessors 6 hours ago. The traffic logs show a spike 3 times larger than any other facility in the last week. That's their next target. Tonight. Elena stared at the screen, then at Izuku, her mouth slightly ageki. She took a slow sip of her coffee. "Okay," she said, a note of genuine respect in her voice. "I'm impressed. The kid's a freaking oracle." That night, Green Arrow ambushed the smugglers at the South Docks warehouse. It was a flawless operation, a trap sprung with perfect precision, all thanks to Izuku's analysis. When Oliver returned to the cave, he placed a hand on Izuku's shoulder. "You did good. You're ready." "Ready for what?" Izuku asked, looking up from the screen where he was monitoring the police cleanup. "A field test," Oliver said. "You're not ready for a fight." "Not yet. But your mind is our sharpest arrow. It's time we let you fly." 2 nights later, Izuku sat in Elena's chair, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. The main screen in front of him was a mosaic of images, a tactical map of a derelict shipyard, multiple thermal imaging feeds from tiny, bat-shaped drones he had helped Elena design, and a first-person view from a camera on Oliver's bow. He was wearing a lightweight headset, a small microphone in front of his lips. "Comms check." His own voice sounded tinny and strange in his ears. "Loud and clear." Oliver's voice came back, calm and steady. "How do I look?" "You're a green blob surrounded by slightly cooler blue blobs," Izuku replied, trying to keep his voice from shaking. "All clear. No hostiles visible on the perimeter. The deal is supposed to happen in the main processing building, dead center of the yard." "You're not just my eyes up here, kid," Oliver reminded him. "You're my brain. See the whole board. Call out anything that feels wrong." "Understood," Izuku said, his eyes scanning every feed, every data point. He felt a strange sense of detachment, like he was playing a complex video game. But the life bar was real. Oliver moved through the shipyard like a phantom, his path a green line Izuku traced on the tactical map. He was a whisper in the darkness, flowing between rusted containers and crumbling structures. "Hold," Izuku said suddenly. He zoomed in on one of the drone feeds. "Heat signature on the roof of the warehouse to your east. Single stationary target. Sniper." Oliver's voice was grim. "Can you get me a positive ID?" "Negative. He's behind a low wall. But I can see his rifle barrel. Based on the thermal bloom, it's a high-caliber Barrett. He's got you in his kill zone." Izuku's mind raced. Oliver was exposed. The sniper had the high ground. A direct confrontation was too risky. His eyes darted over the schematic of the warehouse he had pulled up. It was old, dilapidated. "Oliver," he said, his voice urgent but controlled. "The roof the sniper is on, the structural survey says it's unstable. Particularly around the central ventilation housing. It's rusted through." He highlighted a spot on the tactical map, a point about 15 feet to the sniper's right. "If you can hit the main support strut for that housing with a high-impact arrow, you want me to bring the roof down on him? Not the whole roof. Just enough to disrupt him. It'll be loud. It'll be chaotic. It'll make him move. When he does, you take him." There was a pause. Then, "Smart. On my way." Izuku watched, his breath held, as Oliver's icon moved to a new position. He saw the Balcam lift aim. He heard the faint thwip of the arrow being loosed. A second later, the thermal feed showed a bright flash of kinetic energy as the arrow struck the strut. The image shook violently as a section of the roof gave way with a groaning shriek of tortured metal. The sniper's heat signature tumbled and vanished from view. "Target neutralized," Oliver's voice confirmed. "Good call." Izuku let out a shaky breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He did it. He had saved him. A surge of pride and adrenaline coursed through him. This was a new kind of heroism. It wasn't about fists. It was about foresight. He guided Oliver into the main building, where the arms deal was going down. The targets were a local gang and a seller with advanced, military-grade hardware. From his perch in the rafters, Oliver waited for Izuku's signal. Izuku monitored the exits, counted the hostiles, and identified the leader. "Go," he whispered. What followed was a storm of brutal, silent violence. Green Arrow descended upon them like a vengeful god. Arrows flew, disabling thugs with shots to their shoulders and legs. His bow became a blur, blocking, striking, breaking bones. It was over in 30 seconds. As Oliver was securing the last of the groaning criminals, Izuku's eyes caught something on a drone feed. 2 more heat signatures, moving fast from the west, flanking the building. They hadn't been there before. They must have been lying dormant, using thermal cloaking blankets. An ambush. A trap. "Oliver, you have 2 hostiles incoming. West entrance. They're flanking you, heavy armor, automatic weapons. How did we miss them? Doesn't matter. They're pinning you in. You can't get out the way you came." Panic flared in Izuku's chest, hot and sharp. Oliver was trapped. The room had only 2 exits, and both were about to be filled with gunfire. His eyes scanned the entire building on the schematic, searching, desperate. Then he saw it, a massive, old chain hoist crane system hanging directly above the center of the room, its main hook dangling 20 feet above the floor. "The crane!" Izuku yelled into the mic. "Look up! The main suspension chain for the hoist. It's anchored to that steel beam." He highlighted it on Oliver's HUD. "It's rusted. One well-placed shot to the anchor point should shear the pin." "What good will that do?" Oliver grunted as the first bullets started to rip through the thin metal walls of the warehouse. "It's a diversion. And an exit. It will crash down right between you and them, block their line of sight. The impact will kick up a century's worth of dust. Use it as cover. Grapple to the beams and get out through the skylight." It was a crazy, split-second plan born of sheer desperation. But Oliver trusted him. Izuku saw the Balcam whip upwards, aim, and fire. The arrow, a gleaming point of light, struck the anchor point. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. Then, with a deafening screech of protesting metal, the massive anchor pin sheared. The entire hoist assembly, tons of steel and chain, plummeted to the concrete floor. The impact was cataclysmic. It shook the whole building. A massive cloud of dust and debris erupted, completely obscuring the Balcam's view. For 5 agonizing seconds, Izuku had nothing but static and the sound of gunfire. Then, he heard the whir of the grappling arrow, and a moment later, Oliver's voice, ragged and breathless, came through the comms. "I'm clear. On the roof." That was insane. But it worked. Izuku sagged in his chair, his entire body limp with relief. He felt like he had just run a marathon. An hour later, Oliver stood in the arrow cave, examining a piece of the recovered hardware. It was a pulse rifle, technology far beyond anything on the black market. It was sleek, matte black, and incredibly deadly. Etched near the stock was a small, stylized symbol, a mask, smooth and featureless like a polished black stone. An onyx mask. I've never seen tech like this, Oliver said, his voice grim. Or this marking. They were too organized, Izuku said, rewatching the footage of the ambush. The thermal cloaking, the flanking maneuver, that's not a local gang. That's a professional paramilitary unit, Oliver nodded. They used the local crew as bait. They were after me. He looked at the rifle, then at the symbol. A new player is in town. Highly trained, technologically advanced, and they're targeting me. We have a name for them yet? Izuku looked at the stark, intimidating symbol on the screen. I do, he said, his voice low. Let's call them the Onyx Guard. Oliver looked at him, a new level of respect in his eyes. The boy he had found shivering in an alley was gone. In his place was a young man of incredible intellect and unshakable nerve. A partner. All right, scribe, Oliver said, using the mission codename for the first time in the cave. It felt right. Your first night on the job and you've saved my life and given our new enemies a name. Not bad, he gave a weary sigh. Get some rest. Our war just got a lot more complicated. As Oliver walked away to catalog the new evidence, Izuku stayed in the chair, staring at the screens. He felt the phantom ache of his lost quirk, a familiar companion in the quiet moments. But for the first time, it wasn't a cry of despair. It was just a scar, a reminder of a life he had left behind. He had a new life now. A new purpose. He wasn't Deku, the successor to All Might. He was Scribe, the eyes and the mind of the Green Arrow. And in the shadows of Star City, a new kind of hero was being forged, not in the crucible of cosmic power, but in the quiet, focused intensity of a brilliant mind. The next 6 weeks were a blur of intense, focused escalation. The name Onyx Guard hung over the Arrow Cave like a shroud, a constant, low-grade hum of threat. They were ghosts, leaving behind only whispers and advanced technology. Izuku and Elena worked tirelessly, sifting through terabytes of data, chasing digital shadows, and trying to build a profile of an enemy who seemed to have no history. Izuku's predictive models, usually so eerily accurate, struggled. The Onyx Guard didn't behave like common criminals. Their movements were precise, militaristic, and seemingly random, yet Izuku knew, with a chilling certainty, that there was a grander strategy at play, one he just couldn't see yet. During this time, Izuku's role evolved. He was no longer just a mind in a chair. Oliver, recognizing that the day would inevitably come when Izuku would be pulled from behind the screen, intensified his physical training with a relentless, almost desperate urgency. The sparring sessions became more brutal. The parkour drills became more dangerous. Oliver was no longer just teaching him. He was hardening him, stripping away every ounce of hesitation, every vestige of the UA student who fought for points in an exam, and replacing it with the raw, unyielding instinct of a survivor. Izuku's body responded, transforming under the crucible of Oliver's tutelage. The last of his teenage softness melted away, replaced by lean, corded muscle. He moved with a newfound economy and grace, his Yui-honed agility now refined by the deadly pragmatism of Star City's concrete jungle. He could now ascend the salmon ladder without a single wasted motion. He could clear a 20-foot gap with a silent, confident leap. He could disarm Oliver in a sparring match, a feat that had seemed impossible only a month prior. He was becoming a weapon. But a weapon was useless without a purpose. The moment of transition came on a quiet Tuesday night. Izuku was at the archery range, practicing Oliver's breathing technique. He stood before the target, eyes closed, drawing and releasing in a steady, meditative rhythm. He wasn't aiming at the target anymore. He was aiming at a state of perfect calm. Your groupings are tighter than mine were after 5 years on the island. Oliver's voice came from behind him. Izuku opened his eyes, lowering the bow. It's the only time my brain really goes quiet, he admitted. Oliver nodded in understanding. He was holding a large, flat, rectangular case. He walked over and set it on a nearby workbench. Scribe is a good call sign for what you do back here, Oliver said, his voice serious. But it's a liability. Our enemies are hunting for the Green Arrow's support system. If they ever found out about you, about this place, they wouldn't hesitate to use you to get to me. The safest place for you is no longer in the cave. Izuku's heart sank. You're sending me away? No, Oliver said, flipping the latches on the case. I'm promoting you. He lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in high-density foam, was a suit. It was a masterpiece of tactical design, a stark contrast to the colorful, often impractical hero costumes of his world. The suit was a deep, forest green, almost black in the low light of the cave. It was made of a segmented, lightweight polymer that looked both flexible and incredibly durable, designed to stop blades and small-caliber rounds. The undersuit was a dark gray, moisture-wicking fabric. There were reinforced vambraces on the forearms, echoing Oliver's own, and minimalist greaves on the shins. But it was the other two pieces that held Izuku's gaze. A quiver, identical in design to Oliver's but slightly smaller, and a hood, attached to a form-fitting mask that would cover the lower half of his face, leaving only his eyes visible. It was the uniform of a shadow. A ghost. Elena and I designed it, Oliver explained. It's lighter than my gear, built for your speed and agility. It's got a short-range comms jammer in the cowl, thermal dampening lining, and the plates are a new non-Newtonian fluid composite. They're flexible until impact, then they harden to the consistency of steel. Izuku reached out a hesitant hand, his fingers tracing the smooth, cool surface of the chest plate. It was real. This was happening. He was going out there. The thought was equal parts terrifying and exhilarating. What will I call myself? He asked, his voice a whisper. Oliver gave him a long, searching look. I've given it some thought. You could be Arrowhead or Speedy, but that's not you. You're not just a sidekick. He paused, his expression softening. You told me about your name. The one your friend gave you. The bully. Izuku flinched, the memory of Bakugo's sneering face a sudden, sharp pain. Deku, it means useless. Someone who can't do anything. No, Oliver said, his voice firm, cutting through the old hurt. You told me what your other friend, the girl, told you it sounded like. Dikairu. You can do it. A name is a symbol, Izuku. It only has the power you give it. You've spent your whole life trying to run from that name, to prove it wrong. I say it's time you owned it. Take that symbol of your past, of your pain, and reforge it. Turn their insults into your shield. Prove to yourself, and to the world, that Deku doesn't mean useless. Prove what it really means. He looked at Izuku, his gaze unwavering. Show them you can do it. Tears pricked at Izuku's eyes. He thought of Uraraka's bright, encouraging smile. He thought of All Might, who saw a hero in a quirkless boy, and he thought of Oliver the grim, broken man who had taken in a lost child and forged him into something new. They had all, in their own way, told him the same thing. He nodded, a single, decisive motion. He finally understood. He wasn't running from his past. He was claiming it. Deku, he said, the name feeling different on his tongue. Not a brand of shame, but a declaration of intent. My name is Deku. The night air of Star City was cold and sharp, a shock to his system after the filtered, climate-controlled environment of the Arrow Cave. Perched on the edge of a gargoyle atop a Gothic-style bank building, Izuku felt impossibly small and terribly exposed. The new suit moved with him like a second skin, silent and comfortable, but it couldn't stop the frantic hammering of his heart. The mask covered his mouth and nose, and the hood cast his eyes in shadow, creating a sensation of anonymous detachment. Below, the city sprawled out, a glittering, dangerous web of light and darkness. Cars flowed like blood cells through concrete arteries. He could hear 1,000 sounds, distant sirens, the rumble of a passing train, the murmur of conversations from the street 30 stories below. His senses were on fire. How are you doing up there? Oliver's voice crackled softly in his ear, a comforting tether to reality. He was perched on a building across the street, a silent green sentinel. It's a lot, Izuku breathed, his voice slightly muffled by the mask. It's one thing to see it on a screen. It's another to be in it. Just breathe, Oliver advised. Listen. Watch. Feel the rhythm of the city. We're not looking for trouble tonight. We're just moving. I want you to get a feel for it, to become a part of the skyline. For the next hour they moved. It was a silent, exhilarating dance across the rooftops of Star City. They ran along ledges, vaulted over ventilation units, and used their grappling arrows to swing across impossible gaps. Izuku, to his own astonishment, kept up. His parkour training, honed in the sterile environment of the cave, translated perfectly to the real world. He moved with a speed and agility that felt almost familiar. It wasn't the explosive power of One for All, but it was a close cousin, a grace born of pure physical perfection. Their synergy was immediate and instinctual. They moved like a pair of wolves, one leading while the other watched the flank, communicating with hand signals and brief, clipped words over the comms. Oliver was the seasoned veteran, his movements powerful and certain. Izuku was the newcomer, faster, more acrobatic, a flickering green shadow in Oliver's wake. He felt a thrill course through him, a sense of belonging, of purpose, that he hadn't felt since he'd first donned his UA hero costume. They were about to call it a night when the call came through on the police scanner Izuku was monitoring via his cowl's HUD. An anonymous tip about a high-level arms transfer happening at a supposedly abandoned cannery on the industrial waterfront. The caller mentioned military-grade hardware. The Onyx Guard, Izuku said instantly over the comms. It's too perfect, Oliver countered, his voice tight. An anonymous tip, a classic isolated location. It's a trap, I know, Izuku replied, his eyes scanning a digital map of the district that had just appeared in his vision. But the last shipment of theirs we intercepted contained enough firepower to arm a small militia. We can't let another shipment like that hit the streets, trap or not. There was a pause. What's your analysis, Scribe? Oliver asked, his voice deferring to Izuku's tactical mind. Izuku's brain kicked into high gear. The trap isn't the deal itself. That's the bait. They know you'll come. They'll want to control the engagement. They'll have watchers, snipers, and a heavy assault team ready to box you in. A frontal assault is suicide. He zoomed in on the cannery schematics, but the main building is connected to the old sewer trunk line. It was sealed off 30 years ago. If the city schematics are right, there should be an access tunnel that comes up right under the main processing floor. We don't walk into the trap. We crawl up from beneath it. Risky. We'd be going in blind. Not blind, Izuku said, a flicker of excitement in his voice. He reached into a pouch on his belt and pulled out a device the size of a coin. I brought one of the new sonic imagers. It emits a low-frequency pulse. My HUD can translate the feedback into a rough 3D map of the environment. We'll be able to see through the floor, map out their positions before we even make a move. There was another long pause on the other end of the comms. Izuku could almost hear Oliver weighing the options, the incredible risk against the tactical genius of the plan. All right, Deku, Oliver said, the use of his new name a clear signal of approval. Let's go fishing. The sewer tunnel was even fouler than Izuku could have imagined. The stench of stagnant water and chemical runoff was overwhelming, and the darkness was absolute, broken only by the narrow beams of their tactical flashlights. They moved in a low crouch, their boots sloshing in the ankle-deep, viscous sludge. Remind me to thank you for this later, Oliver muttered, his voice echoing in the cramped space. Just think of it as an immersive stealth exercise, Izuku whispered back. They reached the point on the schematic directly beneath the cannery's main floor. Izuku activated the sonic imager, placing it on the damp concrete floor. A ghostly, blue wireframe image bloomed in the corner of his HUD. He could see the layout of the room above them, the large cannery machines, the catwalks, and most importantly, the people. I've got 12 hostiles, Izuku murmured, his eyes tracing the glowing blue figures. 10 on the ground floor, spaced out in classic guard formation. 2 on the catwalks. Snipers. And the package? Oliver asked. Center of the room. 4 hostiles guarding a large metal crate. Izuku analyzed their formation. The guards were positioned to cover the main doors and windows, just as he'd predicted. They were expecting an attack from the outside. They've left the center of the room relatively open. They're using the machinery as cover. We can use that. He pointed to a spot on the floor above them. There's a maintenance hatch right here. It'll put us out behind that large boiler unit. It's a perfect blind spot. They found the hatch, a rusted circle of iron. Oliver used a crowbar to pry it open with a low, groaning complaint of metal. He went first, a silent shadow flowing up into the darkness. Izuku followed a moment later, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The air in the cannery was thick with the smell of rust and salt. They were crouched behind the massive, cylindrical boiler, completely hidden from view. Peeking around the edge, Izuku saw the scene exactly as the imager had shown it. A dozen men, clad in the now familiar black tactical gear of the Onyx Guard, stood vigil. They were armed with the same advanced pulse rifles they'd seen before. These were not common thugs. They were soldiers. In the center of the room, standing over the crate, was a figure who was clearly in command. Unlike the others, this one wasn't wearing a helmet, but a sleek, black ballistic mask that covered their entire face, featureless except for two narrow, glowing red optic sensors. The figure's build was lean and agile, their posture radiating a calm, predatory confidence. "That's the leader," Oliver whispered, his voice a breath in Izuku's ear. "We take them out, the unit will fall into chaos. Standard plan?" Izuku whispered back. "You create a diversion, I take out the snipers?" "No," Oliver said, shaking his head. "This is your test. The snipers are yours. Use non-lethal. I'll handle the floor team and the leader." On my signal, Izuku's blood ran cold. This was it. His first real fight. His first taste of combat. He looked up at the catwalks. The two snipers were perfectly positioned, covering the entire floor. Getting to them would be a challenge. He knocked a BOLO arrow, his fingers moving with practiced, steady precision. He took a deep breath, picturing the path, just as Oliver had taught him. Oliver held up 3 fingers, then 2, then 1. The cave erupted into motion. Oliver loosed a flashbang arrow into the center of the room. It went off with a brilliant, blinding flash and a deafening bang. The Onyx Guard soldiers cried out, momentarily stunned. In that instant of chaos, Izuku moved. He fired his grappling arrow into the rafters above, the near-silent thwip of the launcher swallowed by the ringing in the air. The GSB system he'd designed worked flawlessly. He was yanked upwards with breathtaking speed, the CO2-powered retraction system pulling him into the shadows of the ceiling before anyone even knew he was there. He landed silently on a high beam, his heart hammering. Below, Oliver was a whirlwind of green, using the confusion to engage the floor team. Izuku had his own targets. He crept along the beam towards the first sniper, who was just shaking off the effects of the flashbang. The soldier raised his rifle, trying to acquire a target in the chaos below. He never saw Izuku drop down from the beam directly behind him. Izuku landed in a silent crouch, rose up, and drove the heel of his palm into the base of the sniper's skull. A perfect, precise, non-lethal takedown. The soldier crumpled without a sound. 1 down. He moved across the catwalk towards the second sniper, who had heard the muffled thump of his comrade falling. The sniper spun around, raising his rifle. Izuku didn't hesitate. He fired the BOLO arrow. The weighted projectiles flew true, wrapping the high-tensile wire around the rifle and the sniper's arms, pinning them to his chest. Before the man could even struggle, Izuku had closed the distance and swept his legs out from under him, sending him crashing to the metal grating. 2 down. He had done it. A surge of fierce pride coursed through him. He looked down to see how Oliver was faring. It was a massacre. Oliver was a force of nature, moving with a brutal efficiency that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. He used his bow as a bludgeon, breaking limbs and shattering jaws. The Onyx Guard soldiers, despite their advanced weaponry and training, were completely outmatched. In less than a minute, all 10 of the floor soldiers were down, groaning and incapacitated. Only one figure remained standing, the masked leader, who had watched the entire exchange without moving, their posture one of eerie calm. The leaders slowly began to applaud, the sound of their gloved hands clapping together echoing unnervingly in the vast, silent cannery. "Impressive!" A voice emanated from a speaker in the mask. It was feminine, modulated, but with a sharp, cruel edge. "Truly impressive. The green arrow. And a new little bird, fresh from the nest. How adorable." Oliver stood ready, an arrow nocked and aimed at the figure's chest. "Who are you?" "You can call me Malice," the woman said. She made a theatrical bowing gesture. "And I am here to deliver a message from my master." She straightened up, and with a speed that defied belief, she drew 2 long, wicked-looking combat knives from sheaths on her back. "The message is simple: Star City is ours now. And you are trespassing." She moved. She wasn't just fast, she was a blur. She closed the 20-foot distance between her and Oliver in the time it would take to blink. Oliver fired his arrow, but she deflected it with one of her knives, the steel head scraping against her blade with a shriek of metal. The fight that followed was unlike anything Izuku had ever witnessed. It wasn't a brawl, it was a duel. Oliver was a powerhouse, his strikes heavy and precise. But Malice was a dancer. She flowed around him, her knives a silver web of death, constantly probing, looking for an opening. She was faster than him, more agile. For every one of Oliver's powerful blows, she landed 3 quick, shallow cuts. Izuku watched in horror from the catwalk. Oliver was losing. He was being worn down, bled out by 1,000 tiny wounds. Izuku knew he had to do something. This wasn't part of the plan. He knocked an arrow, a taser arrow, designed to incapacitate. He aimed at Malice's back, a clear shot. He took a breath. He saw the line. He released. Malice, without even looking, spun around and caught the arrow out of the air, an inch from her chest. Her head snapped up, the red optics of her mask locking onto Izuku's position. "Naughty, naughty little bird!" she hissed. And then she threw the arrow back. It flew with impossible speed and accuracy. Izuku barely had time to throw himself to the side as the arrow zipped past his head and embedded itself in a steel support beam behind him with a loud twang. He had given away his position. Worse, he had given her an opening. While her attention was on him, Oliver had lunged. But it was a feint. Malice had anticipated it. She dropped low, sweeping Oliver's legs out from under him. He crashed to the ground, his bow skittering away across the concrete. Malice was on him in an instant, one knife at his throat, the other poised over his heart. "And that," she purred, "is the end of the lesson." Time seemed to slow down for Izuku. He saw Oliver, his mentor, his only friend in this world, pinned and helpless. He saw the cold, merciless glint of the knife. Everything he had learned, all the training, all the pain, it all culminated in this single, horrifying moment. His analytical mind, his greatest asset, shut down, overwhelmed by a primal, screaming wave of terror and rage. "No! I won't let you!" He did the only thing he could think of. He leaped from the catwalk, a desperate, 30-foot drop. He drew his own bow, a simple broadhead arrow knocked, aiming for Malice's arm, her shoulder, anything to make her stop. It was a foolish, reckless move. He was overconfident, an amateur playing a master's game. Malice simply sidestepped Oliver, her eyes still locked on the descending Izuku. She met him as he landed. He wasn't prepared for her sheer speed. She slapped his bow from his hand, the impact numbing his arm to the elbow. She flowed inside his guard, and a searing, white-hot pain erupted in his left arm as her knife sliced through his suit and deep into his bicep. He cried out, stumbling back, clutching the wound. Blood, hot and shockingly red, gushed between his fingers. The pain was blinding. Malice drove a vicious kick into his already cracked ribs, sending him sprawling to the ground. The world spun, a nauseating vortex of pain and flickering lights. He looked up just in time to see her boot coming towards his face. He barely managed to turn his head, the steel-toed boot catching him on the temple with a sickening crack. Darkness exploded behind his eyes. Through a haze of pain, he was dimly aware of Oliver roaring his name. He heard the sounds of a renewed, desperate struggle. He saw flashes of green and black. Then he heard Malice's voice, distant and amused. "Consider this a professional courtesy. A warning." He felt a hand on his shoulder shaking him. "Izuku! Izuku, stay with me!" It was Oliver. He blinked, the cannery slowly swimming back into focus. Malice was gone. The crate was also gone. The only things left were the unconscious bodies of the Onyx guard and the spreading pool of his own blood on the concrete floor. The mission was a catastrophic failure. He had been arrogant. He had been reckless. And he had paid the price. The searing pain in his arm was a brutal, humbling lesson. Skill wasn't enough. Training wasn't enough. He had faced a true, cold-blooded killer, and he had been found wanting. The taste of blood in his mouth was the taste of his first, bitter failure.